This episode of the podcast is with Yasir Khan. Now, Yasir, for those of you who don't know, has completely blown up over the past year on social media. He has over 1.7 million followers on Instagram, almost 400,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's a public speaking coach, and he's someone that I came across when I was preparing for my TEDx talk. And as the algorithm does, I had never heard of Yasir before, and then it sent me his content my way. And boy, was it some of the most beneficial content I have ever watched in the realm of public speaking, and specifically for my talk. It completely transformed my TEDx talk with his the content that he was giving out for free, both on his Instagram, but also I signed up to his email list where he gave, I think, 10 days of free public speaking strategy and tips. It was phenomenal advice. Really enjoyed the content. I felt like it benefited me so much for my talk, and so I wanted to share that benefit, as we do at Freshly Grounded, try to bring you guys the most beneficial content when it comes to your skills, improving yourselves. And so I reached out to Yasir again, had never spoken to him before, dropped him a DM, said, hey man, really benefited from your content for my TEDx talk. He doesn't do podcasts, or I've never seen him do one, so I was not hopeful, but he was like, yes, we would love to jump on, and he was very kind and gave us his time. So I think you guys will benefit a lot. This is a masterclass on public speaking, and I think that it'll be something that will benefit anybody, regardless of whether you're speaking to just one person or speaking to an entire arena of thousands of people. So this is Freshly Grounded with Yasir Khan. Let's get started. Yasir Khan, welcome to Freshly Grounded. I'm incredibly excited to have you on. Thank you for giving me your time. Of course. I'm excited to see what you have in store for me. Well, actually, having said that, I'll give you a bit of a preview. So this is not going to be an interview, right? I'm going to steal as much of your valuable time as I possibly can, and extract as much value as I can. So I want this episode for the benefit of our listeners, and for me, really. I want it to be a bit of a masterclass over an interview. So to get the most value, I want our listeners to walk away with some tangible techniques and strategies for public speaking. Prior to that, I do want to get a bit into your story, because I'm quite intrigued by it. I'm going to give you a bit of a background as to kind of how I found you, and a bit of background, like a nugget of kind of why public speaking is something that I'm intrigued by, interested in, constantly trying to learn about. So as you know, we've got the pod. I'm 30 actually, as of last month, or as of Feb. And so when I was, I want to say 13 years old, my school put me in my first public speaking competition. And I managed to get to the regional finals. At that moment, I stand on stage and I just break down crying. And I couldn't get a word out. And the reason I broke down crying was actually because I could see my dad in the audience, and he's like the one person I just instantly become shy around, right? And and so that was my first experience public speaking. But I carried on. Much like yourself, and throughout the years with Freshly Grounded, we've done. I've hosted events in kind of arenas in the UK, 5,000 people, and then we've had like tours and stuff with Freshly Grounded, live tours and things like that. But I wouldn't say I'm a great public speaker. I'm just constantly trying to learn from people like yourself. But I do have a kind of a passion for. I have like a constant battle with it. I want to improve at it. It's kind of addictive, the feeling of being on stage and trying to make small tweaks. The tour that we did about 2 years ago, each show was slightly better than the one before, because I was kind of learning. And so then that takes us to 2024. So September 2023, quite like yourself, I was approached by some organizers of a TEDx event. They said, hey, we'd love for you to headline the show in London. And so, fast forward 6 months, February, and it's time for me to do the talk. And actually leading up to the talk, so I want to say, for example, like the last kind of 8 weeks or so, that's when I came across your content on Instagram. And dude, you give so much value for free that I don't know if people appreciate it enough. In fact, you give so much value for free. I don't quite know what you've left for people to actually, have, because it's phenomenal, honestly. And you become so used to, unfortunately in this space, coming across individuals who do have value to give, but that value is often behind that paywall. And just with the nuggets that you gave, my TEDx talk went leaps and bounds from when I came across your content, and I feel like I'm actually a student of yours, though like a free rider student, and your free email list was great, but really it was the Instagram content. So there's a bit of a backstory as to kind of how I came across your stuff. I wanted to kind of give you that intro before we get into the conversation.
Fantastic. You said how when your dad was in the crowd, just looking at him there, all of a sudden you would freeze up. I had something similar with myself too. I used to play tennis growing up. My dad used to be a tennis player. And every time he would be on the court for my tennis tournaments, I couldn't perform at all. I would always make some sort of a silly mistake, to the point where my dad just stopped showing up to my tennis courts because he knew it added extra pressure. So sometimes you really want to impress the people you love the most in your life. And because of that, you don't perform like you usually do, relaxed.
Yes.
You become very stiff. So I feel like with public speaking, that happens too when your boss is in the crowd, your team is in the crowd, so I can relate to that as well. And similar to your journey, I started this with crippling insecurity. So at least you had a public speaking competition when you were 13. I wasn't even thinking about that. I thought, I was so shy growing up. I remember hiding in the bathroom in the schools, waiting for the period to end so that my turn to go up and do the presentation would no longer be there. So but the teacher would just say, oh, maybe Yasir went home or something. But unfortunately, I just get a D in my lessons. So the only place that I found any validation or any recognition was in front of people when I was speaking. And that's something that I had to learn. Because I remember I walked into, you have Toastmasters in the UK too, I'm assuming, right?
That's
Toastmasters
right, yeah.
Club. So I walked into one of these clubs, and I remember walking in front of about 30 people, and I was new to Canada at the time. I didn't really know anyone, and I was sweating. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. And all of a sudden, I just say 20 seconds worth of material, and I just go and sit back on my seat, and I say, what are you doing? This is why you shouldn't leave the house. This is why you should stay at home and play PlayStation all day. You don't deserve to be in front of people. And then a woman came up front, and she said, Yasir, it's your first time in front of a live audience. You've never spoken to anyone before. Congratulations on taking that first step. And I was a little taken aback by it. I thought, is this a Canadian thing? Are these people this nice all the time? Did she hear what I had to say? And then she said something to me that I'll never forget. After the meeting, I was ready to go out and never come back because I felt so shell-shocked in the moment. But she said, hey, Yasir, are you coming back? And I said, yeah, I'll think about it. All those things you say when you don't want to commit, I'll think about it, check my horoscope, ask my grandma, and I'll see if I want to come back. And then she said, Yasir, I remember being in your exact shoes when I started. I was terrified and I didn't want to do it. But I'll tell you, it takes one small step to change your life forever. If you come back and you take this one small step every week, I guarantee you'll get better. So I didn't have any friends. I came back and I trusted her. In a month, I won my first public speaking contest. In 6 months, I won about 8. In a year, I did my first TED Talk. In a year and a half, I did about 52 workshops on campus. And about a decade later, this is what I do for a living. So all of this happened by complete accident.
That is that's phenomenal. My first question was actually going to be wanting to dive into your story, because I know that you've mentioned before that you weren't kind of a natural born public speaker, and so I did want to introduce the crowd to that. So, but what kind of like, if you strip back the psychology of your journey, I love the quote in. It's a movie scene. I haven't actually seen the movie, but there's a scene. Al Pacino is the guy. He's a coach for a football team, and he says that life is a game of inches, and. What I took from that, I find that quote so incredible, because it really is the small decisions that you make that impact the rest of your life. And so can you kind of point back to that 1 inch, that small decision that you made that made you go to the Toastmasters club and try and make that difference?
Yeah. Most of my most pivotal moments in my life have come from crippling insecurity that has built up to the point that I can't take it anymore. So for me, I was always the shy kid. I didn't really get any attention from people in school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I would go to family gatherings. I'd be the quiet person. And eventually it really boils up and you start getting very frustrated with yourself. So for me, majority of my teens, I was very depressed. I was on medication, and it wasn't a good life. So when I came to Canada, I remember my parents had to constantly find ways to talk about me in a positive light to relatives. Like, oh, what's Yasir doing now? Oh, yeah, he's figuring things out. They would always try to make me sound better than I am. And I felt so guilty because they had paid so much money, put in so much effort into my education. Here I was in Canada doing the same thing all over again, not changing at all. So eventually I decided, if I don't change now, when will I change? So at a certain point, I decided I have to do something about it. I didn't know what Toastmasters was. I didn't know public speaking was a route I wanted to go into. What I did was I typed in how to make friends in Canada. That's what I was looking for. And the first thing I found was Toastmasters. Now I'll tell you what I thought. So they got great
SEO.
Yeah, I thought Toastmasters was a place to get a good grilled cheese sandwich. So I said, okay, that sounds pretty good. So I walked in and it said Toastmasters public speaking, and I'm thinking, okay, this is not the right place for me. But you know, I believe a mentor once told me, sometimes you don't get what you want, but you get what you need. Right. And you don't see those opportunities coming. And I feel like this was a perfect example of that. I didn't know I needed that, but I very much did.
And you said that you came when you came over to Canada. So at what point did you come over to Canada? How old were you at that point?
2017. So about however many years ago that is. So about 8 years ago.
That leads me to ask you. Sorry, I'm trying to sort my life out. My light out. There's a Freudian.
Yeah,
there's a Freudian slip there. I'm actually also trying to sort my life out. Yeah. So that's interesting because you came over 2017. We're at 2024 now. It's not too long ago. But dude, 1.7 million on Instagram, almost 400K on YouTube. You know, I know that these things are often just numbers, but the numbers do represent something, and it represents, obviously there's an audience of people, a big audience of people who are obviously benefiting from your content. And so when did you notice that things started taking off for you in that realm, in the realm where people wanted to use your services, or people felt they were getting value from what you were saying?
Yeah. Well, first I'll tell you, Instagram, I created a brand new account in May of 2023. So the 1.7 million is since last year. So I'm surprised you didn't mention my main platform, which is TikTok. So that's where I started first. But I'm not
a TikToker, man. Like if it's TikTok, I'll probably not even seen it. Like, I get it. I subscribe to the idea that you have to choose a platform and just like go at that one, and it's just like, Instagram for me.
I can talk about content for the next 5 hours if you want me to, but I don't want to derail the conversation. To answer your question about how I knew when I started, when I was going to Toastmasters and I started winning some competitions, people would start noticing, and I became that public speaking guy on campus. Then once you have something that happens to you that transforms your life, you can't stop talking about it. You see a lot of people who, let's say they lose a lot of weight or they get in shape. Now all of a sudden they can't stop talking about dieting and working out, right? For me, public speaking was the same thing. Now I discovered this cure for my confidence, and I was talking about it. And then a lot of students were having issues with their presentations. Maybe English wasn't their first language, or they weren't very confident. So I thought, why don't I just start teaching them? So I started teaching my students. I started doing workshops. And by the way, sometimes I'd hold workshops week after week and no one would show up. It'd just be me waiting for an hour for someone to show up, empty room, and then going back home over and over again. But eventually I did enough of those where some students started getting very good grades and their teachers would notice. So their teachers would ask, hey, how are you getting better at public speaking? Because you did pretty bad in the last presentation. And they would say, oh, I went to Yasir's workshop, or he helped me out with this one. So word got around and the university got me to do presentations with students on campus. Then when people saw me do that, they said, hey, can you also do this for the faculty? Then I would train the faculty on public speaking. Then the faculty would say, hey, I've got a business in the city. You want to train them on public speaking? So word started getting around, and eventually I started doing this more and more. Then when I made social media videos, you still have a lot of imposter syndrome in your brain, right? Because I'm thinking, I work with students. This is what I do. These people don't have a lot of money. I can't make a career out of it. So when I made one of my first social media videos, I had someone book a call in my calendar. And when I got on a call, they said, yeah, I want to help you. I want your help with public speaking. How does it work? And I just gave them the first number that came to my mind, which is like $25 an hour or whatever. And the question he asked me afterwards was, do you do this for a living? I said, yeah, of course I do this for a living. What do you mean? Like, why do you charge $25 an hour? That makes no sense. And all of a sudden in that moment, I realized he wasn't taking me seriously because of my pricing. Right. Because it sounded like I had never done that before. So the next time I hopped in the call with someone, I just 10x that price. How much do you charge? $1,000. Like, oh, okay. And so how many sessions will I need? Now I'm thinking, okay, how many sessions does somebody need? And then eventually I said, yeah, 4 sessions. Now I'm thinking 4 sessions for $1,000. I'm getting rich here. And the guy on the call is like, 4 sessions, $1,000. So that's $4,000. Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Like, no. I'm $1,000. But then he ended up paying, and he became one of my biggest customers. And I realized, holy crap, this is a whole world in itself. And the next thing you know, I went down business education, and here we are now.
What I love about that story is that it's very similar to what I say about marriage, and what that is that I feel like in a generation to come, our children or our children's children will say, you know, like, Mom, how did you meet Dad? And most of them will say it was through some form of technology, right? Like social media, like we had an app, which is fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think it'll be very rare to find those stories where somebody's like, oh, you know, I was introduced to your mother through like a family friend, or, you know, I saw her at a wedding, and, you know, we got talking. And it's very similar to your story with your business, which is that you're probably one of the, remaining individuals who's like, actually, you grew this very organically through a student got trained by you, then the staff, and then they said they had a business, and then you at a later point went into social media. I think that does give it a sense of validity as well, is to say, it wasn't built through social media. Again, nothing wrong with building a brand through social media initially. I think that's the best way of doing it now, of course. However, the fact that you were able to prove it off of social media and then bring that to the masses is actually really, really inspiring.
Yeah, what I will say is the scalability of what I do was massively impacted by social media. Because otherwise, even though I'm a communication coach, I'm very much an introvert. I don't leave the house very often. I don't talk to a lot of people. If you ask me how many friends I have, I can probably count them on one finger. So I don't really go out a lot. So because of that, it limits my reach. So my home base is my home. The place you see me now, these 4 walls, they're my best friends. I have names for each one of them. So that's why it helps me with my business to leverage social media to reach more people across the world. Because Faisal, I have people reaching out to me from Kenya, from Indonesia, from places that I never thought I'm having an impact. Wow. And I would never thought that was possible, especially without social media.
No, that's incredible. Okay, fine. And so you're obviously giving those people value, and value is where I'm going to go next. So we've got to know Yasir Khan, we've got to know your story. I'm going to start getting technical now. So I've got a few kind of things that I want to pick your brain at. So first of all, I want to talk about hands. You speak about hands quite a lot in your content, what to do with your hands. And people seem to ask you this question a lot. Either they kind of keep them to the side, or they don't know where to put them, they don't know how to hold them. What's your advice on how to manage your hands during when you're speaking publicly?
I would change the question. Instead of asking what would you do with your hands, I'd say, what is the purpose of movement? So for example, if you are moving your hands because you're nervous or jittery and you're constantly doing this with your hands, so I'm really excited to be on this podcast and I really want to share with you some tips. I'm moving my hands a lot, but does it improve the experience? It doesn't. It makes me look very fidgety. So what are you trying to do? Because there are times when you don't need to move your hands at all. Maybe you're doing a podcast, you don't really need any movement. But for most people, I realize their hands are an indication of how they're feeling. So if you are rubbing your hands together, you're scratching yourself, it's very easy to tell you're very nervous. So a really easy thing I like to do is just make the palms visible. I learned this from a public speaking coach. His name is Dhananjaya Hitarachi. He just said when you face the palms towards the audience as you're talking like so, it makes it easy on the eyes. Whereas if people can only see the back of your hand, it makes it like they don't quite know what's in your hand. So the same way when your hands are in your pocket or they're behind you, people think you're either hiding something or you're not feeling comfortable. Whereas when your hands are freely moving, you don't really have a care in the world. Yeah, I'm really comfortable. I'm free to open my hands the way I want. So for most people, making the hands visible really helps. On an energy standpoint, you'll realize when you start moving in any way, whether you're moving on stage or your hands, you tend to become more energized. I have seen very few people who, after moving their hands, don't talk louder. So it's a way, it's like a domino effect. You move your hands more, your voice gets louder, you get more energetic, everything else tends to improve. That being said, there are times when moving your hands probably isn't ideal. So if you look at a lot of executives and executive meetings, you can't talk like this all of a sudden. One thing that I want to share with you today is this company. It doesn't look ideal, it looks odd. Right. So you want to have a little bit of visual imagery, but control is the word to keep in mind. Control the gestures. One thing that we are implementing today is a brand new system to teach everyone public speaking. So they're still controlled. I'm not theatrical with it. So depending on what your purpose is, what the platform is, what the context is, you will use your hands in a different way. A great book that I would recommend everyone to read is What Everybody is Saying by Joe Navarro. He is a former FBI agent, I believe, and he talks about body language and how you can read body language in different ways. Phenomenal book.
Is he on social media? Like,
Who
is he
isn't at
quite
this
big on
point? That's
socials?
the one.
Yeah, that's true. But I've seen a body language a clip from this guy, and I'm sure he could potentially have been ex FBI.
There's
or
another
CIA or
one
something
too
as
that
well.
people confuse him with, Chris Voss, the author of Never Split
No,
the
I
Difference.
know Chris Voss. Yeah, Chris Voss is incredible
Yeah,
as well. The negotiation book, right?
yeah. I'm sure a lot of FBI agents are getting in on the success of Joe Navarro too, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, so when you spoke about movement being helpful, but there's also a time where movement can really exaggerate how nervous a speaker is, especially when it comes to pacing. So should a person pace at all? Should they remain completely still? Is it subjective? And how can they move in a way where it doesn't look like they're nervous pacing? So moving away from the hands, more down to the feet now.
Yeah, moving with the purpose is the most important tip I can give you. I remember when I did my TED Talk, there was a speaker who, for the entire duration of the TED Talk, was walking left, right, left, right, left, right. And it was like the audience was watching a tennis match like this the entire time. And not only does it get distracting, but your neck starts hurting because you're constantly doing this. And I remember talking to the cameraman after that, and he was just like, I was just moving the camera here. It's not a fun experience. So I would say move with a purpose. When you have a point you're trying to make, you can move on the stage. One of the things my coach taught me was to divide the stage in different segments. So let's say I'm telling you a story about when I came from Pakistan and now I'm in Canada and I'm teaching public speaking. So when I'm talking about Pakistan, I'm on one part of the stage. And then when I get to Canada, I'm on another part of the stage. And then maybe I move to Dubai, then I'm on a different point of the stage. And then when I talk about Pakistan again, I can go back that same part of the stage, and now people visually know that I'm in Pakistan again. So it helps segment the stage. And also, when you're making your point, you try to make your point dead center, right in the middle. You don't want to make your point in the corner. Now, regarding context, if you have a lectern on stage that you are required to be behind, let's say every single speaker before you has come on stage, been behind the lectern, then I would not stray away from that unless you're explicitly told to use the stage. But in 9 times out of 10, if there's a lectern that's optional, I will completely ignore it because then it hides 80% of my body. I'm a very physical person on stage, and I feel like walking around establishes more of a connection with people. So there's no rule about you should move or you shouldn't move, but why are you moving? If you have a purpose, then do it.
Yeah, I've seen you mention the lectern thing, and actually, when I saw your content about the lectern, it actually changed my opinion on that. When I did that hosting that I mentioned at the XL Arena in London, it was behind a lectern, and actually you start relying on it and kind of hiding behind it, and then you're forced. There's less of a connection between you and the audience, and then you don't have anything else to rely on other than your voice. And so actually moving your body synchronizes well with your voice if you're not using a lectern. So that kind of made me think about that. Speaking of body language, I want to go into it a little bit. So I mentioned that guy that I saw on Instagram once. One of the things that he said that I found quite interesting and useful was body language wise, if you have your palms open like this, it's quite an inviting posture. And he goes, as soon as you go like this, it's like it's authoritative. And both are great, but depending on what you need. If you're saying like hey, can everybody calm down? With your hands open, it's like everybody calm down. And it's like that small difference makes a big, that small thing kind of makes a big difference. I've noticed with yourself when you're speaking in front of live audiences, it seems like your body language is quite intentional, and it's very authoritative. It's back straight. It's chest out. And there's a lot of confidence kind of emitting from your body language. Is that something that is intentional? How did you work on it? And what are some body language tips that you could provide for us here?
Yeah, I've had a change in philosophy of how I do my workshops. I remember when I started doing keynotes, I was so young, and a lot of the people that I was training were VPs and executives, and I was constantly trying to get their validation. So I thought, okay, I have to come and pretend to be this upright individual. Today I will teach you X, Y, Z. But I noticed I felt better about how I was standing and presenting myself, but it was really boring. It was very dry. It sounded very executive, and these people need a bolt of energy. So I changed my process, and I made it more comedy oriented. I want to make people laugh so they enjoy the experience. And with that, you'll notice I tend to be very animated on stage. I'm not usually stationary. So when I'm being animated on stage, I'm experimenting with different parts of my body. So I'm always using some sort of a gesture. There's even a time when I'm doing a little bit of a catwalk to demonstrate how not to stand on stage when you're nervous. So I experiment a lot of those things. And when you move your body in so many ways, in so many workshops, you tend to pick up the things that work best for you and things that don't work best for you. And I repeatedly, when I did my workshops, people would come to me and say, hey, how do you manage your posture because your back is so upright? Now, I'll tell you a secret. I have lower back pain. So I can't really bend over too much. So the reason I do it is not because I want to be confident, it's because my back hurts too much.
Well, it works in your favor.
Yeah, so the side effect of that is people think it's very confident. So if I were to replicate that, I would say don't go out there and get back pain, but instead just pretend like someone just hammered the bottom of your spine, and immediately you just correct yourself. I remember a coach of mine said, imagine there's a string going through your body, and you grab that string and you just straighten it. And then your posture will be upright like so. So when you start doing this initially, it's going to feel really alien, like anything in public speaking. But then you start becoming aware of it. You start slouching a little bit and all of a sudden fixing yourself. So for me, having done this so many times and using my body in so many different ways, I've grown accustomed to my style. And I've also seen a lot of people who don't do it who still exude a lot of confidence.
Okay, I like that. That's very valuable, actually. That's something we could take a lot from. Okay, let's move on to the next point here. So volume. Volume is another thing that you speak about a lot. Tonality, volume. I remember seeing one of your videos where you were asking the audience for a topic.
Yeah.
A random topic. They give you a topic, and then you would kind of give the talk in two different ways. One where it's like it's the same volume, the same tone throughout the entire bit, and then the second version was sometimes you were quiet and sometimes you were loud. How important is volume, and how can somebody use it as an advantage?
So important. If you want to communicate assertiveness and conviction, it's very, very hard to do it without volume. Now, yes, depending on the setting, you can be a bit more quiet, but most of the time, I've realized most people, they think they're talking loud enough when they really aren't. Me included. Right. I used to mumble.
I think I'm the opposite.
Yeah, and by the way, I have ADHD too, so I tend to talk very fast and I have to control myself. And what tended to happen was I talk really fast, but I also mumbled, and I would talk like this the entire time. And people would say, what are you saying? Can you say it again? And I would get angry at myself. Well, why can't people understand me? So a coach of mine, he had me do an exercise. He said, just put one hand on your chest and put one hand on your belly. I said, okay, I'll do that. And then he said, okay, just observe what part of your body, the chest or the stomach, rises more. And I noticed that my chest was rising more. And he said, you should be breathing with your stomach, your belly. So that means you're breathing very shallow. Does your throat get very dry when you speak? And I said, all the time. So I had to learn and train myself to speak from my belly. And there's a video that I have where I train someone to do that as well, where if you take a deep inhale into your belly, you want to imagine like when you inhale into your belly, there's a little coil or a spring. And you inhale and it gets really coiled up. There's a lot of tension. And when the words come out, they come out with all the trapped air. So all of a sudden, you'll have that projection in your voice all of a sudden that most people don't have. And I'll tell you, people notice this. Because most folks that you will interact with, they're not very lively. They don't have that enthusiasm. But once in a while, you'll have someone come in, booming voice, very passionate about what they're talking about. Instantly, they'll stand out. So I tell my clients to do this. Pick the most boring topic in the world. Nothing bores you more. And just inject volume. And ask yourself, would you listen to this more than if you did not do it with high volume? And 10 times out of 10 times, the answer is yes. The other question I always get is, can you train this? If I'm naturally a soft speaker, can I train myself to do it? You absolutely can. One of the distinctions I would make is whatever you do in terms of your speaking, you have learned from your childhood or from the people around you. You've learned these behaviors from your parents, whoever you grew up with. So you want to think about these as a pattern of behavior that you learn from people around you that can be changed, right? So if I plucked you out of where you are right now, Faisal, and I made sure you grew up in South Africa, your accent would be different, your mannerisms would be different, the language you use would be different. So public speaking is no different. Just remember, it's not about who you are as a person. I'm just a quiet person, but what behaviors you've been surrounded by. So if you can just surround yourself with people who speak the way you want to speak, or you practice that long enough, you can speak louder and you can be more energetic.
Okay, that's quite interesting, and actually it leads me in really perfectly into speaking about pausing, because the two are so related. If you're just loud and like saying everything in one breath, it's also just going to feel like somebody's screaming at you, right? So let's break down pausing a bit, like we did with the hands. How does it work? When is too long of a pause? When is there too long of a pause? Is there too short of a pause? Yeah. How should you use that as a tool?
Yeah, I like to use pauses when I'm thinking of the next thing I want to say, and when I want to build some anticipation to what I'm about to say. So if I'm building up to a big point and I really want the audience to linger, I'll give them a second. I'll give them a little bit of time to process it. And you'll notice just in this pause right now, a little bit of emotion in the back of your mind is building up. Because we don't like silence. Silence, in a lot of ways, it signals uncertainty. I don't know what's happening. So for example, if let's say you and I were doing an interview and you said, Yasir, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I said, what are you thinking in your head? Did I ask the wrong question? What is happening here? Can you hear me? Is it uncertainty starts to arise.
Right.
But if you said the same thing, Yasir, tell me a little bit about yourself. Yeah, let me see where I can start. I'm going to start. Now I told you. What I've done is I've given you context to my silence. Now you know why I'm quiet.
That's
so
really
it alleviates a lot of that uncertainty because people get nervous. I don't know why nothing is happening, right? So in some senses, if you are in a meeting, and especially an executive meeting, you will not get time to butt in your thoughts because everyone's just like a shark trying to get their opinion in. So it's very important to tell people you're about to think, even in a job interview. What's your number one strength? I have many. Let me think of the perfect one I can give you. And then you pause. Now you have permission to do that. And it also allows you to collect your thoughts. The second thing you can do is you can hide a lot of your mess ups. So I see this I'm taking stand-up comedy right now. Many people forget their next jokes. They don't know their jokes. So they'll say a joke and then they'll pause for a bit and they'll think of the next joke. A perfect example I can give you. I had a really good friend named Aaron who was doing a Toastmasters competition. He's this big towering figure, 6'6" basketball player, right? He goes up on stage. He's talking about this story and he's saying, oh, this is the lesson that I learned and I will never forget the words that he said to me. Pause. Building up the tension. He said to me, believe in yourself, or whatever the story was. And he stepped on stage. People went up to him and said, wow, that was incredible. I love the part where the emotion was building up and then you paused and really let us sink in with the emotion. It really hit home for me. And then I looked at Aaron and Aaron's like, no, I just forgot my speech.
The thing is, though, is that what's interesting about that is that there are times when somebody does take a pause and it does, you can tell that they've genuinely forgotten their speech. So where's it feels like, again, life is a game of inches. It's like, what's the inch there? What's the difference between coming across like you're doing it on purpose and looking like you've forgotten what you're saying?
I'll tell you. It is how much attention you bring to it. So many people, when they met, let's say you and I are having a conversation, right? And you forget what to say. Are you going to say, oh my God, I forgot what to say. I didn't know where I was going with that sentence. Let me start a new sentence. You're not going to say that. It sounds ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
But we do that on stage. Oh my God, I don't know what my next sentence was. I'm so sorry, guys. Let me look at my notes again. If you treat it as a conversation, there's no forgetting the next thing. You can just go into it. So most people, if they forget, they either visually get a given indication. You can see their eyes darting. They start sweating. They start saying and a lot. Or they start scrambling for words. That's a pretty good indication. As long as you maintain a poker face, you should be okay. Take time to gather your thoughts.
Yeah. So going back to the TEDx talk, right, where I used a lot of your content to kind of really get that kind of self-paced coaching in, some of the changes that I had made were actually kind of being comfortable with the silence. That was a big one. Another big one was being comfortable not moving, because I do tend to pace. Not moving, yeah.
Okay.
And not moving was great actually for me at that point, because I didn't want to pace. And so I used movement intentionally, like you said. And so one way I did that, so I had noticed, I kind of made a last minute decision that worked, I think, really well in my advantage. I actually would love for you to pick apart my talk once they publish it. So I don't know, they say that it can take up to 3 months, right? So we're just patiently waiting for it to go up on Ted's channel. But so I was thinking, look, how can I make myself stand out? And as you know, there's so many speakers kind of on the stage for like a 5-hour period or whatever. And I thought, you know what, nobody has a kind of prop on stage, like a whiteboard or like an easel or some kind of paper, right? And so I thought that's what I'm gonna do. I didn't have a presentation, and the reason I didn't have a presentation is because I wanted to test myself to not lean on a presentation, and actually I wanted to test myself. Can I do this with my voice alone, and can I draw that emotion and stuff? But I noticed that having that kind of easel or like this stand with the paper on it, that allows me to make an intentional movement, so I'm not just like stable, right? And so I speak about the ACT framework, which is the framework that's been kind of popularized by social psychologist, her name's kind of completely slipped my mind, but authenticity, connection, transformation. You know, if you want to be able to transform, you must be authentic, you must connect with the audience, and only then can you truly transform, and the three go hand in hand. And I thought, do you know what, when I speak about the framework, let me just write the framework down. And that's all I did. It was nothing crazy that I was planning to do with that piece of paper, but it really made a big difference, because it allowed me to make that movement in a way that was calculated. It was intentional. It wasn't like a nervous pace. I wrote, and I could refer back to. I could go back to, but there was somewhere I was going back to. So there's the movement. There was the pausing. There was the volume, which I benefited from a lot as well. But there's one thing that I think benefited me over everything else that I wouldn't have been able to. That I wouldn't have had the confidence with my talk had I not had this. And I'm intrigued by your opinion on this. And that's preparation. So I want to know, is it important? So preparation in general, is it important? And if it's not always important to be prepared, when does a person become good enough to not need to prep? And I want to give you some more context.
Sure.
I've done talks both prepared and unprepared, and when I've done unprepared talk, I've leaned on the fact that I know my audience. You know, these guys are viewers of my podcast. I can use my energy, and we can just have a conversation. And I prefer for it to be raw. What I realized when I started preparing my talks is that I was just like making excuses. I was BSing myself, because actually, there's nothing better than going on stage with a prepared talk and knowing what's gonna come out, and then tweaking it according to audience reaction on the night. But I've never seen your opinion on preparation, and I've asked different speakers on their opinion, and some say, you know, I like to have something vague. Others like, no, I just like to conversate. And others like this. I had a conversation with this like incredible comedian, and he was like, dude, everything's got to be prepped. So I want to know your opinion on preparation. I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah. I will give you speaking of authenticity, I'm going to give you a more vulnerable example here. For the first 3 years of my career, I did the same workshop over and over and over again, and I knew it inside out. And I didn't change a word of it because I was just so comfortable with it. Someone would say, hey, do this workshop. I show up, say the same thing, do the same thing over and over again. But after watching my coach, his name is Craig Valentine, he's a 1999 world champion of public speaking. After seeing him speak, I realized, holy crap, man, you're getting stagnant. You are not learning anything new. There is so much more to learn in this space. You got to prepare. And I realized I was not preparing because I was lazy. I thought, yeah, let me just do the thing I always do. People would have a reasonably good time, but it wasn't really memorable. Now, the issue I had, and I'm imagining you might have this too, is when you prepare, sometimes you feel a lot more robotic than you would as you normally talk on your live streams. So now I have to say this in this way. For comedians, I have to have this punchline. I hated doing that because it just did not feel authentic to me. But that was a very flawed approach, because there is a valley that you have to pass through. Let's say you're preparing and you're very, very authentic, but you're a little all over the place. You don't quite know where you're going and the words are not hitting. Then you practice a lot and you start sounding very robotic because you're trying to stick to the script and you're trying to memorize everything. But then if you keep going from there, going so far that you know your material a lot like your ABCs. So if I asked you to narrate the ABCs to me and stop at, let's say, K, could you go talk about something else and come back and continue right from that point on? You probably would, hopefully, if you had a standard education, right? So your speech is the same way. You rehearse it so many times till you pass that point where it's robotic. It becomes ingrained in you. Then the luxury you have is you're able to forget everything. So I can step on stage, forget everything I memorized, talk about whatever, and go right back into my script. So that way it also sounds natural. Now I'll give you 3 main components that I follow when it comes to preparation. The first one is the content. So you need to know, the first one is the structure. How does the content flow? I'm going to talk about this first, that second, that third. And here you also want to have stories involved. You want to make sure there's exercises in there depending on how long your keynote is. Once you know the structure, then you go into the content. What are the words that I'm going to say? What are some of the key takeaways I want the audience to have? And the biggest issue I had with this was too many takeaways. Teaching 46 different things, the audience won't remember. Condense it to 1, maybe maximum 3 sentences, that if the audience forgets everything, what's 1 to 3 sentences that they can remember? So once you've got the content down, now you know what the structure is, now you know what you're going to talk about, then you deliver, then you rehearse. And I'll tell you this, Faisal, most people don't get to this stage. Their idea of preparation is, I put the slides together and I stepped on stage. So a lot of my clients will say, yeah, sir, I prepared my presentation so long in advance, but it didn't work. And I said, okay, how many times did you say it out loud? Well, I just read from my slides right before I went upstairs. So you didn't say it out loud. So that's like saying, I'm Taylor Swift, and right before I step into a stage of 80,000 people, I'm going to write a song backstage, and I'm just going to show up. How well do you think she's going to do? So what you do the structure and the content well ahead of time. Once you know your material, I have what I call the rule of 100, which is I just say the entire thing out loud, start to finish 100 times. Faisal, when you do it 100 times, there is an absolute guarantee when you step on stage, you are your most authentic and confident self. There is no doubt about it.
Wow. Putting in the time, right? Then the reps, getting the reps in. It's incredible, actually, because like getting the reps in is like it's the unanimous agreement that if you want to get good at anything, you have to put the reps in. And kind of going off topic here, I remember seeing something online about somebody talking about money management, and they were saying that money is the same thing. So understanding how to manage money, how to make money, is a skill. And with any skill, it's about getting the reps in. And so likewise, when it comes to managing money, what people don't realize often is that it's getting the reps in with that as well. But anyway, I digress. I've got 3 last questions for you. I'm going to give you all 3 of them, and then so that you can have a think about where we're going to take this. So I want to know about the use of PowerPoints and slides. I think that'll be an easy, quick one. I want to know about storytelling. How important is it? How do you use it? Should you always start with a story? I like to start with a story. Can you do it without a story? And then finally, I'm going to ask you to give us a gem, a framework, something that we don't see through your social, something perhaps from your workshop, something where we can have an exclusive bite of from yourself that we can kind of take away. So they're the last 3 things, and then I'll let you go, I promise. So let's start with using slides, using PowerPoints. Are you pro? Are you against? Are you fine with it, but it has to be done in a certain way? And let's dive into that.
Yeah, I am pro presentations, pro slides, as long as you remember that they are a visual aid. You can't just hide behind the lectern and let the slides do the talking. They have to aid what you're saying. So a lot of people in corporate especially, they treat presentation slides like a user manual where they will have 5 paragraphs of information, because you want to think about it like this. If you are on stage and you have the speaker over here and you have 5 paragraphs over here, either the speaker is talking about the same thing that's on the slide. if they're doing that, if they're just reading what's on the slide, why do I need you here? Just send it to me in an email. I'll read it myself, right?
Yeah.
Or what they're saying has nothing to do with the content. And now you're thinking, do I look at this person or do I look at the slide? And they get confused and they tone out. So if you look at Apple, the way they do it, they usually have one image and one text. And then they talk about that. I feel like that is perfect. That's the model that I would follow. Unless your sole goal is just to come deliver information and leave, which I work with a lot of accountants. That is their goal. And that's fine. You're not trying to inspire everyone. So if used as a visual aid, I think it can be a great tool. One of the things that I like about presentations and slides is the sense of momentum. So if you're just listening to a speaker who perhaps isn't the best, you're wondering, when is it going to get better? Are things going to change? I'm a little bit bored. But when the slides are moving, you want to think about it like a TikTok or an Instagram. Something new on screen every 10 seconds, every 30 seconds. There's this momentum. Things are moving fast. If you can do that well, I think it's a great tool to use.
I've actually seen you use kind of a whiteboard and stuff like that, and for some reason I seem to be more receptive to that. I don't know if it's because you're seeing the person. It's almost like watching somebody work out their math, kind of like you're getting like behind the scenes look at things. And I always find that interesting. Like, what is he going to write? What is he doing? And so I've started finding that actually quite interesting. Okay, storytelling. Let's dive into that.
I don't think there's a more important skill in public speaking you can learn than storytelling. It's the one that took me the longest time. Whenever I ask my coaches, they say, if there's one thing you can master, storytelling. Because let's face it, everything that I'm saying to you right now, Faisal, someone else has said somewhere before. Someone's written a book about it. Someone's going to teach you the 3 best ways to start a speech. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. But if I can give you my unique spin on how I learned it, how it affected me, now there's a unique spin on it. And also, if you look at how we bond with other human beings, rarely will you bond with someone based on what they do for a living or how old they are, all these bullet points of facts, right? But when we meet someone for the first time, what do? Hey, what do you do? Where are you from? How old? None of these help me know you any better. So if you really want to build a connection with the audience, whether you're in business, whether you're trying to tell a message that really harbors with the audience, you have to go the story route. And the way I have learned storytelling is you want to think about it like a vehicle that's just more efficient at driving the message home. If I say, I'll give you an example, okay? A couple of years ago, I decided that I was going to go vegan. I was just going to eat plants for a while. And I had a friend of mine who was vegan for about 8 years. And every time I would meet him, he would say, hey, you should go vegan. You know, it's very healthy for you. You know, this. List of facts. I didn't care. I had absolutely no interest in it. Then I went to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class, and I noticed that my stamina would just run out. And the guy that I was rolling with, I asked him, hey, how do you have such high stamina? And he said, honestly, you're not going to believe me. My girlfriend, she went vegan. And I noticed her stamina went up, her energy level was much better, she was losing weight, and all of a sudden, she was just a lot happier. So I tried it for 2 months, and my stamina just shot to the roof. I don't know what happened, and I just won my first jiu-jitsu tournament. Now I heard that, I'm thinking, is that going to be true for me as well? Why don't I try it? And then I went down the vegan diet, and then when my friend said, hey, you finally decided to listen to me, I said, no, I didn't listen to you. I listened to the guy in my gym that I just met. I said, why? I've been telling you this for about 10 years now or however long. Well, because you kept telling me the facts. I didn't connect with the facts. I connected with his story. So a story doesn't have to be some elaborate, I jumped off of a plane and then I landed on a mountain or something. It can be anything from your everyday experience as long as there's some emotional change. That emotional change in a story is what people connect with. They see themselves in your story. They believe you, and that's how you develop trust with people.
Do you know what's incredible is that you mentioning that has just reminded me of how I started being more conscious of things like recycling, and it's through a story. And I can pinpoint the moment. Yet in school, growing up, you learn about the environment, you learn about recycling. Living in the UK, we have to when we put our bins or our trash out, you have to have a separate one for recycling, a separate one for general waste. And you get these facts, and okay, cool, it's just a part of life. It was only until a few years ago I was with a friend, and he was looking. He had a bottle of water, and he was looking for a bin to put it in, a trash can, and he was looking for a specifically recycled one. And he said, I didn't used to pay much attention to recycling things like just a bottle until I went fishing. And he said, when I went fishing, and I noticed, first of all, how much waste is in the water. Mm-hmm. But then secondly, I realized that, and the guy I was fishing with kind of made me aware of the fact that when people are fishing for the fish and then you eat them, actually the fish are consuming these plastics, and then you're consuming that fish that's consuming the plastic. So it's bad for you as well. And it's at that moment that I thought, I should be more conscious of this. But it was through a story, and like you said, it wasn't a crazy story. It was like, hey, I went fishing. But that story was enough for me to go, whoa, and it's stuck with me to this day. So that's actually quite incredible.
Can I build on that for a quick second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a phenomenal point. If you look at some of the most read literature in human history, it's all stories, including religious scripture, by the way. Mostly stories. Yeah. Can you imagine if it's just a list of points? It would not stick. Speaking of recycling, I want to share with you how I learned to recycle, because it's interesting to hear yours. I remember my dad picked me up from school, and I was eating a bag of chips, and he picked me up in his car, and we're going back home. And I grew up in Pakistan, and recycling isn't really a thing there, right? So when I finished eating the chips, I pulled down my window, and I just tossed the packet out. And the moment I did that, I heard this screech, and my dad just stopped the car immediately. And he looked at me like the Terminator. He said, get out and pick that up. Wow. And we were in the middle of the road too. And my dad is a straight shooter, very strict kind of guy. I was 9 years old at the time, got out of the car, went, picked up the packet, came back in my car, sat down. And my dad looked at me and said, never do that again. And that was the last time I ever littered. And again, that's a story. That's an experience. If he just said, hey, you know what? Littering is not good. Don't do that again. You're damn sure I'm going to do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Okay, Yasir, conscious of the time, final question. I want to get a tidbit, something from you that we don't see as much in social, something, maybe a framework, maybe a message, something that you're passionate about when it comes to public speaking, something that we can take away from this episode and from yourself.
Yeah, I'll give you two components of what helped me become a good public speaker. The first is the conscious, the second is the subconscious. Conscious being, what are you consciously doing to become a better public speaker or a better communicator? And if you're not stepping on stage, by the way, you're still a public speaker. You're still speaking in meetings, you're talking to people, you're presenting yourself to the public. Ask yourself, what do I do on a daily basis that contributes to that? Am I practicing my public speaking? Am I reaching out? Something that took me a very long time to do is to reach out to people who are much better than I am and just stop doing everything myself. Because I thought, if I watch this person's videos, if I buy this course, I'm going to become a better public speaker. And yes, you can, but it's going to be very, very slow. If you have the means, go work with someone or go find someone who you love and how they speak and just absorb everything they have to say. So one of the people that I learned from, his name is Craig Valentine. To this day, he's coaching me as well. And I adore this person and how well they speak. So consciously, what action are you taking? The second piece I would say is, what are some of the unconscious or subconscious elements that are affecting your communication style? Because I remember I was working at a cinema, and most of the people around me were these teenagers, like 15 years old, 16 years old, and their language is not the most sophisticated, right? So when I would go back home, I realized I started picking up a lot of that language and I started speaking like that. I didn't really sound very professional. When I was watching YouTube videos, the things that I was inputting into my body, it wasn't very professional. So I had to be very conscious of what's going into my subconscious mind. So not only do you have to consciously train yourself to be a good public speaker, but what do you listen to? Who do you listen to? What kind of books do you read every day? Because you're not consciously making that decision at the time, but it is sitting in your brain. So one of the best things I can tell you is listen to people you admire. Read the books from people you admire. You don't realize it, but it's sitting in your brain. And one day when someone asks you in a podcast to talk about it, those things will eventually click because they've been sitting in the stem of your brain for a very long time. So put in conscious effort and be very conscious of the environment you're in. Those are the two tips that I would have for you.
That's really interesting because you hear about, you be conscious of who you're surrounding yourself around because, you know, it rubs off on you, but you don't really necessarily think about it in terms of skills. And so actually that's a great point to take away actually. I know that I've benefited so much from like even Audible, listening to certain audiobooks. It changes my perception on things, and it's kind of like the books you surround yourself around are important and stuff. Yasir, I'm so grateful for your time. I think that when we get off the pod, I'm going to be kicking myself because there's going to be a ton of questions that I wish I asked. But I think we've taken a bunch of value from this. What made you say yes, by the way, when I got in touch? Because I've not seen you do many podcasts. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. You answered my question because I don't do many podcasts.
Okay.
I'm very cognizant of where I spend my time and specifically who I speak to. I'm notorious for skipping birthday parties and not going to random because I'm too transactional with my relationship with people. I'll think, okay, if I spend 2 hours preparing for this and then going there and coming back, what could I have been doing instead? And usually whatever I can do at home is better. But when I looked at your content and the things that you're doing, you're passionate about your work, you've actually gone through my material, you've implemented it, I feel like there's a certain sense of giving back that I feel entitled to, where if someone has watched my material that have applied it, at the very least I can have a conversation and hear their story and share mine too. So you seem very genuine. I saw no reason to say no. Well,
look, I really appreciate it, and genuinely I have benefited from your content so much, and since then I continue to do so, and so I hope this is the start of us being able to connect some more. When you're in the UAE, please do let me know, and I'll do the same if I'm ever in Canada. And thank you so much for your time, Yasir, and I wish you all of the best.
Appreciate it, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Take care, man.